Hello out there in La Land. We continue our classes regarding how to be a honorable mensch, how to be a upright person, improving character, and we're dealing with the very critical subject of telling the truth and avoiding speaking false. Today's class is Leili Nishmas Rachalea Bas Rav Chaim Tzvi. We wish to thank Mrs. Libby Bamser in the studio, of course Rebson Sippy Claver, who's the brains and the power behind everything of Na'aleh, and all the other wonderful people involved in this wonderful network of bringing Torah out to the masses. We continue. We should avoid common temptations to mislead and temptations which lead us to lie. A person should be willing to admit when they are wrong. The Gemara, on many occasions, will relate how a certain Tana or a Mora said his opinion, and then later he rescinds his opinion. The question is posed, why don't we just say his final opinion? Why state the opinion and then only to retract it to say how his mind was changed? So the Rambam explains the reason for this is to teach a person to be honest and truthful. Even though I held one way, I realize I've made an error and I've changed my mind. Just today in Daf Yomi, you're wondering what I'm learning now. It wasn't so pertinent to the Daf, but the Maggid Shir mentioned that we got into discussion of nets, of when sunrise is. It's a bit of a debate. You think nothing can be more absolute when the sun rises, but it's something which is empirical. And there's also a scientific way of judging it, and there's a way of looking at a high point and a low point. There's something which is called Netz HaMishor and Netz HaNira. Netz HaNira means when you see it. So he pointed out that Rav Elyashiv, we're talking about the heaviest, dutiest, most important Gedolin. Rav Elyashiv used to daven Netz HaNira, and Rav Chaim used to daven Netz HaNira, and later in life they realized that it's not an appropriate and accurate way, and they changed, as has many, many other people. They realized, even though they've done this for years, decades. Both of these men, Rav Elyashiv and Rav Scheinberg, both of them are in their hundreds, right? They're over 100 years old, and yet, even though they've done it for years and decades, they realize they've erred. They realize that there's a more appropriate way of doing it, and they change their ways. That's the lesson we learn. There is stories. If you read, and I'm probably a person who's done a lot of this, read a lot about the biographies of great rabbis. Time and again, you'll read a story about how a great rabbi, just when they had an important shir to deliver, they delivered in an excursus, a masterpiece, and then someone pointed out that there was an error, or they themselves realized there's an error, and they said, I've made a mistake. Now, first time you read this thing, it's pretty important. Pretty impressive. A person is willing to embarrass himself. But now it seems like you can't be a great Rosh Hashiva unless you do this. However, I actually saw such an example. I believe it was after Reb Benish was nifter, the Mir Rosh Hashiva, and Reb Rafal Shmulevitz, the son of Reb Chaim, the great Reb Rafal Shmulevitz, gave his first shir, and this was his crowning of becoming the Rosh Hashiva of the Mir. He gave a shir, and after the shir, someone approached him and told him about a mistake, and he said, you're absolutely right, what I said was wrong, it's definitely wrong. And even though Reb Rafal Shmulevitz is the epitome of Midos Tovos, just the epitome, the way I saw it, like he was so concerned about truth and not about his reputation. I would have been mortified. My first public shir, and someone said I made an error. It wasn't on his mind at all. All he wanted was to relate the truth. We have to acknowledge errors is a characteristic of being an honest person. It's also a characteristic, as Rabbi Joseph Lushman points out, of being a smart person. It says in Pirkei Avos that one of the attributes of being a wise man is you'll acknowledge the truth and admit when you are wrong. In other words, the wise person wants the entire truth more than even wants to be right. Most people are more concerned about being right than being honest. But Pirkei Avos teaches us more important than being right is to be honest. It's important, the Gemara says in Brachos, that you should teach your tongue to say, I don't know. And not be afraid to admit that you're not knowledgeable. It happens very often that people don't know the answer to a question, and they skirt and they avoid it, and they'll switch the subject. If you don't know the answer, say, I don't know. I'm a teacher, and many times when I ask questions, I don't know the answer. The appropriate thing for me to do is to say, I don't know, instead of getting onto somewhere else. And everyone knows how to be slimy and manipulate the conversation elsewhere. Admit, you don't know. Okay. The Talmud says, this Gemara in Shabbos, it's other place in Chazal, there are three questions that we're going to be asked. And one of the questions is, as a matter of fact, the Gemara says in Shabbos, this is the first question, were you honest and faithful in your business affairs? So says Rabbeinu Yonah, that the worst lies that a person can tell are those that are done to cheat in financial matters. But even lesser lies that are not involved in deception, outright deception, should be avoided. It says the Sefer Hasidim that a would-be purchaser should not, as done as a bargaining strategy, they should not go to the person and say that your produce is inferior, that your products are of lower quality, if they're not, just as a strategy to pay a lower price. What a person should say is, I'm willing to pay this amount. I'm not going to pay higher. I'm not trying to get the person to lower the price. And this happens very, very often. You go into a store, as a rule, there's a set price. There's not room to negotiate, unless you live in the Middle East. However, when you go to